Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Stitched in Sweden. I'm Maria, your host, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as mmonska. The show notes for this episode and all the other episodes can be found at stitchedinsweden.blogspot.com, and you can also join us over in the Ravelry group, which is Stitched in Sweden there, and currently we have a knit-along going on for the Swedish spring shawl, or the lattice shawl, and that will be running from May 1st until June 5th. So it would be lovely if you want to come over and participate in that. We have a few finished objects already, and a lot of people sharing what yarn they're going to use, and just sharing their progress. So it's a lot of fun, and it would be great to have some more of you. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this week in Stockholm, some things I've been working on, one finished object, a tiny bit of spinning, a technique tip, which isn't exactly a technique tip specifically, but it's a method that I use, and then a little bit of question and answer. So let's get started. So starting out, first I would like to say a very happy podiversary to Dan and Kay Jones of the Bakery Bears podcast. I know that they had their 1-year podcasting anniversary very recently, and so I just wanted to say that I really enjoy watching their podcast and seeing all the different places that they go and visit and take us with them. So it's really enjoyable to watch, and I love the little credits, not credits, like the outtakes that you do at the beginning. But yes, so happy podcastiversary. Alright, so this week in Stockholm, I didn't do a whole ton of knitting. I was working a lot, and we also spent some time with Thomas's family, so there wasn't as much knitting time as sometimes I have, but it was a really lovely week, and got to spend a little bit more time outside, playing with Thomas's nephew, and it's definitely spring feeling, like I say every week, but it really is nice now. We have an old oak tree outside of our apartment window, and it is the last one to leaf out, but it has, it started this week leafing out, so it's pretty much, well, it's not fully there yet, but it's nice to see some green looking out the window now. But yeah, we had a nice time hanging out in the park, and it was quite chilly when the sun went away, but it was a lot of fun anyway. I did a little bit of knitting at a cafe this week, and I didn't go to my knit night just because that was the only night that I was free from babysitting, and I was kind of ready for a little relaxing time at home. So, yeah, but I did do a bit, I guess, and so I'll show you what I've been working on. So I'll start out with the loose top that is by Mare Stevens, and I've only, this is in my Love Sock Wool bag, I've only knit like maybe an inch or less. I think it was about 1 repeat. You can see where my marker is from where I started this week. I pulled this out last night because I really want to have this top, and I'm not totally enjoying knitting it. I wish I had washed the yarn first, because I've talked about this before, but it's the Holst Garn Super Soft, which is 100% wool, and this particular yarn still has the spinning oil, or some of the spinning oil in it, because it comes directly off of the cones at the mill, and it's not washed. well, I don't know, it's probably washed at some point, but it's not fully washed when it's completely done being made. And so it still has it has a particular smell. It is sort of a woolly smell, but it's not really an oil smell, but it definitely smells like something else. And the yarn is a little bit sticky when you're knitting it because it does have that extra oil in it. Anyway, I started working on it a little bit last night, but I had to stop because I have a little, like, dry spot hangnail kind of right where my yarn travels over. And with this yarn being a little bit extra sticky anyway, it just kept getting caught and it was just really unpleasant. So I put that down and I really would like to work on it this week. I know I've said that the past 3 weeks or something, but it's not going to get done unless I knit on it. So since I have finished one thing this week, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I think that I will try to pick this up a bit more this week. Another thing that I was working on a little bit this week is the Salus socks, which is a free pattern by Julia Reed. And this is how much I have. I'm still in the first sock. There's the heel. I just did a heel flap and gusset, although there is a different heel in the pattern. I've said this before, but I'm knitting these top down and the pattern is for toe up, so mine is reversed. So these little V's are the other way if you knit them toe up, but I like them this way. So I just did a couple of repeats. You can see my marker, and I probably have maybe 2 more inches to go before I start the toe. I'm not sure. But I am knitting these on Haya. They're not the sharps, they're the regular ones. Haya fixed circulars. This is a 40-inch or 100 centimeter cord. I'm doing magic loop. And these are a US size 0, which is a 2 millimeter needle. I think before I might have said 2.25 or something. But it's 2. I am using the West Yorkshire Spinners Signature Floor Ply in the Penny Royale color, and that is number 530. So it's a 75% wool and 25% nylon blend, and 35% of it is Blue Face Luster. And Kay was talking about this on their podcast anniversary episode, and she was saying that another online store started selling the West Yorkshire Spinners, but also Love Knitting sells some West Yorkshire Spinners, so in case you're looking for it. They often have a discount or deal going on, so you could find some there. This is in my little bag from the Wool Barn, and I believe she's having an update on the 17th, so Sunday. So I might be checking that out. We will see. So those socks, and then I also worked on my blanket, which I'm calling my Honeycomb blanket because it's the hexagon blanket, you know, this one. And I started a beekeeper quilt, which is the Hexy Puffs, a couple of years ago, and I never finished it, but I have a nice big jar of, like a big cookie jar, clear jar of hexagon puffs at my parents' house. And I was calling that my Honeycomb quilt puffs because beekeeper, honeycomb, hexagons. So I've transferred the name over to this one. And I did a few more hexagons on this week. Or I might have just attached the ones that I showed you last week. I don't remember. But I'm not going to show you this all the time. Probably. But I'm still really loving it. So I just didn't have very much time to work on this because I didn't bring this one with me anywhere that I went. But I did do one this morning, and this is out of the Fiber Space. I think it's a scrumptious 4-ply. No, scrumptious lace. And this is what I was knitting my Candlelit shawl out of, which is a finished object. So the Candlelit shawl is patterned by Helen Stewart of the Curious Handmade podcast. And I knit this shawl as a gift, which I will be giving to someone in a little while. And it's all finished. So here it is. Has a little picot edge. I blocked it yesterday on the floor while we were out and came home and it was dry, so it was lovely. It has some nice little eyelets and then more eyelets at the bottom. And I knit the medium size. There's a small and a medium for this pattern. Helen has recently re-released the Pebble Beach shawlette as a pattern with 3 different sizes, and I have that pattern and I would like to knit probably the medium size, but I have to look at the yardage requirements again. But I'm planning on doing that sometime soon. And she's having a knit along right now, I think, for any patterns any shawl patterns, or maybe any of her patterns, I'm not sure. But I might enter this in that. So you can see where my marker right here, that's where I was last week. So I knit quite a bit, because of course the edging is has the most stitches, takes the longest. But I really like how this shawl turned out. It's not triangular so much. It's sort of like, I think it's called a heart-shaped, where it's like, goes up. Like you don't pull it straight across, otherwise it like waves, kind of. But I imagine that the recipient will likely wear it like this. And it will just be a nice layer. I think it will be a nice layer in the summer, and it will also be a nice layer in the winter, because in the summer you could wear it over, you know, a lighter top, and this will just be a nice little extra layer. And then in the winter too, you could wear it over a sweater or something, and it will also just be a nice little extra, or could be like on your lap like a blanket. Not like a real blanket, but you know, just a little something. So there is that one, and all the yarn information and stuff is on stitchedsweden.blogspot.com in the show notes for this episode, and the past just one episode, I guess, that I talked about it. So this will be going to someone else soon, and we'll see if they like it. So the other thing that I worked on this week a little bit was my tea time cross stitch. This is a pattern by the Frosted Pumpkin Stitchery, and I showed you the, I think it was called Sugar is Sweet sampler that I did before, which was one of the first kind of larger cross stitch projects. It's not even that big, but one of the first cross stitch projects that I actually did and finished and framed and put on the wall. So I hope this will be kind of like the second one of that. So here it is, and you can see that I have done a bit, and I really like how it's coming out. So my fabric is sort of a pink, it's definitely a very pink fabric, and the original was done on more of a off-white cream color. So I have slightly changed some of the threads because I held up the ones that were called for in the pattern up to my fabric, and I didn't like how they looked. So I just changed a couple of them. Some of them are just like really slight changes, and then some are bigger changes. Like this, I just did this round border part, and I think that was supposed to be like this kind of brighter pink, but it just, you can't really tell on camera, but this pink is like just different enough from this pink when it just didn't look good. Like this is more like bubblegum pink, and the fabric is more a little bit like dusty rose salmon-y pink. So they just kind of clashed. Anyway, I'm really happy with how this is coming out, and I just have, if you're not familiar with this pattern, there's a little border around with teacups and teapots and little pastries and things, and then a final kind of wiggled border around. You can see that I don't have it in a hoop or anything. Sometimes I use a Q-snap. So this is the Q-snap. And these come apart. And there's 4 pieces, but you use them put together, obviously. And how it works is, like, it's pretty sturdy plastic. And you just would take your fabric for your cross stitch, and you lay it over, and then you snap these into place. So you would do it on all 4 sides. It comes with 4 of these little connector pieces. So you do it on all 4 sides, and depending on the size of your fabric, there's different size Q-snaps. I think this one is the 11-inch one, but I know there's larger ones too. And so you can do this. It gives you a nice, tensioned surface to do the cross stitch on, but sometimes for me it hurts my wrist to hold this thing. It's not very heavy, but I don't know. Sometimes my wrist gets irritated from it. So this one I've just been doing just holding the fabric, which works fine. And I did that a little bit on my Sugar is Sweet sampler too, and the stitches aren't uneven or anything, so it works out really well. And then for this one, so like one of the nice things about having a Q-snap or a frame that you're working in is that you don't have any fabric coming down like this, so that you always have, when it's straight, you always have a nice easy access to the back, and there's not a risk that you're going to catch anywhere on your fabric as you're coming back up through the fabric. But one way that I kind of deal with that when I'm not using the Q-snap is that I use these little clips, and so I could like roll up some fabric and clip it. I used to use bobby pins. Sort of worked. Not as well. These are super strong little clips, and I think they're made by Clover. I bought these at Joann's Fabrics in like, a big pack of them. And they're for sewing. They have they're a pin alternative, I guess. They have a flat bottom. And anyway, they work well for pinning fabric back, clipping fabric back if you don't want to use a pin. So that is my tea time cross stitch, and yeah, that's been a nice little break from knitting when I couldn't, because like this little cut needs to heal on my hand, or maybe I just need to try it with a different kind of yarn. I did a tiny bit of spinning, but not much, because my shoulder was hurting. this week. But I am doing a little bit more spinning on my trindle, and this is a puni from Deb of Fondant Fiber, and I'm trying to spin this one thicker purposefully so that I can use it directly in my blanket so that I could crochet up a little hexagon. And it definitely is spinning up thicker. This particular puni seemed to have a lot more fiber in it, so it's taking a bit longer, but also I didn't spin on it because my shoulder hurt. So, but when I did spin on it, it was nice. And I'm using the larger, heavier arms this time to get that thicker single. So, oh yeah, and I just remembered, someone asked how much yarn I was saving aside for the white borders. And I just have a ball of the Lana Grossa, this like medium weight one. This is a 50-gram ball, and I still probably have 10 or 15 grams left, and I've done this many hexagons. So I've ordered another couple of balls of that yarn, but it's really easy to find here, so, and I'm not worried about dye lot or anything because it is white, and it's such a standard manufactured yarn that I really doubt that there'll be much difference in the dye lot. And also, like, if there is, it'll be in separate parts anyway, and you're not going to be able to tell. So I don't really care if there's a slight difference in white. What I was thinking about this, if anybody has any suggestions, I would like to wash this at some point, and I'm thinking of doing some small pieces like this and doing a couple of pieces like this before I attach them. And before I would attach them, I would wash each section separately in case there's any bleeding of the colors. Then I might be able to go back and take out the white part. I don't know if I'm going to do that. But maybe then it just won't bleed on the whole thing, and also I think it's going to be a little bit hard to wash it when it's the whole blanket. But if you have any suggestions of how to lock the color in here so that it doesn't bleed when I wash it, that would be really great to know. Most of these yarns I have worked with before, and I'm trying to remember if they bled or not before I use them, but it's not a guarantee. So I don't know if I should wash it in vinegar or if I have to heat it or what, so I might do a little more research on that. But for now, I don't know, I'm just doing it. So I did have one question this week, which came from, I think, Lady by the Sea, which is the one that I didn't write down last week before Ravelry crashed. And that was if I had any suggestions for how to keep track of where you are when you're using charts for knitting. Both of my shawl patterns are charted only, and in the future, I guess, depending on how many people would be interested, I might try to write out the patterns. But I think if you can learn to knit from charts, that you will expand your knitting possibilities a lot. Basically, I don't really have that many suggestions, but one thing that some people find helpful is using a chart keeper. So if you live in the US, I'm pretty sure KnitPicks sells a chart keeper. There are some independent people on Etsy who sell chart keepers. Basically what it is a magnetic surface where you can put your pattern, a printed out paper pattern, on it, and you will have a little magnetic strip which will serve as your place keeper, so you can move the strip up as you knit. What I think makes chart knitting so great is that you can start to learn how to see if you've made a mistake in your knitting. So you can learn to read your knitting. And that totally just, when I learned that, it took me to the next level of knitting for sure. So what's nice when you have a chart is that you can see, this wasn't charted, but for example, if this was in a chart, you would be able to see all these yarn overs that are stacked on top of each other, and you would see that in the chart. So you could see it in your knitting too, and if suddenly you were doing a yarn over in this section which you know should be solid, then you would know you were off. So you could go back a little bit and figure out where you were off. So I like being able to do that and seeing it visually and having it kind of mapped out how it will look before you start knitting it. Because with a written pattern, you are just trusting that it's right and trusting that you've not put an extra knit stitch in there somewhere. Where in a chart, you can sort of see it graphically, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. So personally, I don't use a chart keeper, but I do kind of say it over in my head what the particular row is that I'm knitting. And sometimes if I'm working on a more complicated chart where I couldn't say it all in my head, or like a color work, I will use either, if I have it on my phone or a tablet, I might use the, I think it's called J Knit Lite app, which is a free app, which basically is a chart keeper. It just, you upload your PDF and then you can move a line, a highlighted line. You can move that along your chart so you can keep track of where you are. I have also used sticky notes in the past. So just, have your chart and then put your sticky note and move it up each row that you finish. So those are really my only suggestions that I have. In terms of reading charts, in case you don't know how to read a chart, it comes with a key, so there will be, it basically looks like a piece of graph paper oftentimes, and then each symbol represents a different stitch technique that you might do. So usually an open circle is a yarn over, a dot could be a purl stitch, usually a blank square is a knit stitch, and yeah, you just read them typically from bottom to top and then from right to left, so the opposite way that you read English letters. And yeah, that's kind of, I think that's the only advice I can give. If you have a more, if you have a really specific question, or if that doesn't answer the question, then let me know, and I'll try to go into it a bit more. But one thing I wanted to talk about this week a little bit is a technique that I use for sort of building a sweater. And it's not going to be super in-depth about the math that I do, because I did a separate video on that, which you can look at if you're interested. But because I am in the process of starting a sweater right now, where I'm sort of building this sweater from, I knew kind of a basic design of what I want it to look like in the end, because I have the Anthropologie sweater that I'm using as sort of a template, I guess you could say. I don't have the physical sweater, but I have the picture of the sweater online. It's called this Sparrow. It's called Sparrow, if you're interested. It's a tunic, and I think they describe it as like a, I think it's just like a knit tunic. I don't know. Anyway, so I drew sort of a schematic, you could say, of the actual sweater. I'm calling it a sweater, but it's a tunic. So I started out by drawing with this pink pen, sort of what the tunic will look like front and back. And each of these different textures represents a different stitch. So up here in the top is garter stitch section. There's 1x1 rib on the edges of the collar and the sleeves. And then this plain part here on the sides will be stockinette. There will be some 1x1 twisted rib here. And then this part will be moss stitch. And I want the back part to be a little bit lower than the front. There will also be a tiny bit of twisted rib here on the bottom parts, and then a little slit up the side. The back part, I'm not sure about this bottom part because whatever, it's complicated. This top part though will be a 4x1 rib, and with a little bit of garter stitch up here at the top, and then both of the front and the back will have an exposed seam. So I started out with this schematic, basically. And then I asked my mom to measure herself. So I draw out this little person here, and I have her take all these measurements. So the distance from the top of the shoulder to like mid armpit underneath to get the shoulder depth. Then we have the upper bust circumference, which gives you a good measurement of your shoulders. So if you have wide shoulders, and I have wide shoulders. If you have a problem with shirts or jackets especially fitting in your shoulders, if you take your upper torso measurement, which is basically if you put a measuring tape underneath your armpits and as high up as it can be straight underneath your armpits, if that makes sense, then that's your upper torso measurement. Then the bust measurement at the fullest point, waist measurement at the skinniest point, a high hip measurement, kind of widest point hip measurement, so maybe like across your bottom, and then for this one, because it will be a tunic, the circumference at the length of the tunic. So that's what the bottom measurement is. And then for each of these, I also have to know the distance. So I need to know the distance, like between, actually for not for every single one, but for example, from the upper torso to the waist, and from the waist to the high hip, and from the high hip or from the waist to the lower part. So you get an idea of how many rows you have to work with if you need to do some increases and decreases and things like that, so that you know where on the sweater certain elements will be hitting. Because when you look at my schematic here, I know that I want this twisted ribbing part to be at the waist, for example, and I want to make sure that I get up to the increases before I'm at the bust, so that I'm not increasing on the bust, because that would be awkward. And so things like that. Anyway, I started out with these two schematics, and then I knit a swatch. So somebody asked me if I'm doing a swatch for a particular project, and if it's going to have more than one color in it, or mostly if it's going to have more than one color. If I do the swatch in each color. And my answer is no. This has never come back to bite me. And usually I only have the color that I will be working on for the project. I mean, I guess if it had multiple colors in the project, I would swatch in all the colors, because if it was a color work project, then I would be swatching in color work. But if it was like a striped project, I wouldn't knit a stockinette swatch in one color and then a stockinette swatch in the other color, because I just wouldn't. So this sparrow-ish tunic that I'm going to knit, I'm going to be knitting it in this onion knit yarn, which is it's called Onion Pheno Organic Wool and Nettles, and this is 70% organic wool and 30% nettle fiber. And nettle fiber basically is a plant fiber, and you might think of nettles as pointy things, but actually the fiber doesn't come from the pointy part, so it's really soft. and it's just a plant fiber. And the cool thing, I think, is that the wool is what gets dyed and the plant fiber doesn't pick up the dye. So you get kind of a nice depth to the color, sort of a heathered effect. So anyway, here's the yarn. You can see it has like a nice little halo from the nettles also. And sometimes you get little chunks of parts of it that are parts of the plant fiber that kind of pull out, but it's not a problem. I've knit with this yarn before. So I got this in color number 817, which is called puder, or I don't know how to say it. It's Danish. But I'm pretty sure that it means powder because it's really close to the Swedish word for powder. And it's, I don't know, a light tan-ish color. So, anyway, all this to say, I got 6 balls of this. And I wasn't sure if this yarn was going to work for this project, but I thought that it might because I didn't want to do 100% wool because I wanted it to have a nice drape to it, not be too warm since it is sort of going to be a summer top because it's sleeveless. I guess you could wear it over a long sleeve shirt or something, but I have the feeling my mom will wear it mostly just as a sleeveless top. So, what I was saying is that I wasn't sure if... Oh, so I wanted to have something that wasn't 100% wool. Most of the yarn that I knit with is 100% wool. I wanted to make this a project that my mom's going to like the end result, but also that it's going to be fun for me to knit. And so I had some of this yarn, this onion yarn, in this blue color that I had knit. Actually, I knit my mom a hat for Christmas out of this yarn. And I was, thinking about the yarn I had, thinking about the yarn that I could access easily here in Stockholm so that I can knit this quickly so that she can have it when I see her in a little bit over a month. And I knew that I had a tiny bit of this yarn left, and it was enough to make a swatch. So I could swatch this yarn and see if it was going to work, and then I could go to the yarn store and buy the yarn, rather than buying the yarn or having to buy a couple of different kinds of yarn and, not being sure if it was what I really wanted to use. All of this is to say that I did not swatch in the same color as the yarn color that I'm going to knit the final project with. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen this swatch that I was working on. Anyway, I've said this before, but I like to get as much information out of my swatch as possible because I want to make it fun to knit because swatches are really important. And why not? I knit this on a US size 5, possibly a 3.75 millimeter needle. Not sure. And basically what I did is I started out with something like 35 stitches or 30 stitches or something like that. And I started out with a normal rib, a 1x1 rib down here. And you can see like it's kind of messy. It's not very neat. So I knew like I'm not going to use that kind of rib. I'm going to do a twisted rib, which is an example of it is up here. And it looks much neater, I think. Even the backside of the 1x1 twisted rib looks quite neat, I think. Actually, I haven't decided if I'm going to do it with this being the front part or with this being the front part. So I'll see. So then I did a little stockinette section. I did a garter stitch edging just so it wouldn't curl as much. And then I did a garter stitch portion, the 1x1 twisted rib, moss stitch, and then I did a 4x1 rib with some short rows, which is why it curls. Not curls, but which is why it goes like this. It's because I did some short rows there. And the reason why I wanted to try out some short rows is because I'm going to want to have the bottom part, like I said, I want to have that go down a bit. Here's the back where it's going to go down. and so I wanted to test out short row shaping. Also because this part might need to go down a little bit here, depending on how I end up doing this back part. So I did the short rows in the 4x1 ribbing, and there they are. So it makes that nice curved edge. An interesting thing that you can see from this swatch is that depending on what type of stitch you're doing, you get a different gauge. So you can notice that my swatch isn't a perfect rectangle. Obviously it's not a perfect rectangle because of this top part, but even on the sides, they're not straight. The bottom is straight, the sides are not. So you can see the stockinette stitch and the garter stitch are wider, obviously, than the ribbing, and even than the moss stitch. So I've also had to consider that a little bit with my design, schematic sort of thing. This is a pretty big swatch. I don't usually swatch this large, but I had a lot of stitch patterns to try out, and I wanted to give each stitch pattern enough space to try it out, and also I wanted to see how the overall fabric felt. And it's quite nice and drapey. Having that plant fiber in there, I think really helps with that. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to knitting that. You can see up here at the top, I did some calculations for after I measured my swatch, and my sort of stitch count that I was getting is pretty much 21 stitches and 28 rows, and these are in each of the different sections of how I swatched. There's some slight variations, but I've figured it out and thought about like where it's going to be smaller. Okay, it's going to be a little smaller at the waist. Well, I do want it to go in at the waist, and I'm going to do some decreases, but I'm not going to do as many as I might do if it wasn't going to be 1x1 rib at the waist, where I know it's going to pull in a little bit more. Things like that. So basically, I found out that I have about 5 1/4 stitches per inch, and after I got that information, and I also have all my measurements, all my mom's measurements, then I could do the math, it's really simple, which changes the stitches per inch into number of stitches. So you do stitches per inch times the number of inches that you need to get the number of stitches that you'll need. And that's for the, like for example, for the entire circumference. And then I'm likely going to knit this in 4 pieces. So it will be like 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I will need to take the entire circumference number of stitches divided by 4. So that is kind of a long explanation of how I go through the process I go through to start knitting a sweater if I'm sort of building my own sweater, or if I'm making some major modifications to a sweater and basically adding only the stitch pattern from the original pattern or something like that. I hope that helps you. But let me know if you have any questions about that, for sure. So, to end this week, I wanted to ask you a question, which is, it's something I've been thinking about this week, particularly, and that question is, are you a private or a public knitter? And I have come to realize that I am very much a private knitter, and even though I share this video and talk with all of you every week about what I'm working on, there are not very, I don't know, there are not so many people, or like people who I meet every day might not necessarily know that I'm a knitter, because I don't knit all the time when I'm with other people. When I'm alone, or with Thomas, obviously, or like if I'm like in my apartment, or when I lived at my parents' house, or when I was at school and I was at home, then I would knit then. And I like to think that I knit in public, but when I actually think about it, because I know I've said before, oh, I knit on the train sometimes, and I do sometimes, but as I think about it more and more, even when I'm knitting on the train, I'm not usually comfortable knitting on the train. I think part of it is because it's usually crowded, and so I feel a little bit awkward, like I might be taking up too much space, or somebody might not take a seat next to me because I'm knitting. Like if my elbows are taking up too much space or something. I don't know, it sounds really stupid. But I don't knit on the train that much, actually. I listen to knitting podcasts on the train all the time, and I think about knitting a lot on the train, but I really actually don't knit very much on public transportation. The same sort of thing is true if I'm visiting with other people. Even people who know that I knit, so for example, Thomas's family, they all know that I knit, and I've knit them all different things. And when we go over there a lot of times on the weekend, sometimes like Friday nights, we go over to their house for dinner. And most of the time I don't knit. And I think it's because I'm a private knitter. Like, I don't knit when I'm with other people who aren't knitters so much. Part of it is because I know that I can knit and do other things at the same time. Like, I'm good at knitting and reading at the same time. And actually knitting and reading at the same time helps me concentrate more on what I'm reading, because I have to focus a lot more on what I'm reading and what I'm doing at the same time, sort of. So it's kind of hard to explain, but I find that when I'm knitting, I can focus on what I'm reading more, because my mind isn't wandering off to other things, because I already am doing two things at once. And so personally, I know that I can do other things while I'm knitting. I can have a conversation with someone, I could read, I can watch a movie or something like that, and I could interact with other people. But a lot of times, if I'm with other people who don't knit, I don't feel comfortable knitting because I think that they might think that I'm being rude or cannot do more than one thing at a time. So I'm not comfortable with that, because I want to be engaged and have them feel like they have my full attention. The other thing is, when you're knitting around non-knitters, you get a lot of questions about what you're working on, which is lovely. I'm always happy to talk with people about what I'm working on. Obviously, that's why I share with all of you every week. But I don't want it to feel like that has to be the only conversation that we're having, because for me it's just such a part of my everyday life that, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so my question is, are you a public or a private knitter? And I have the feeling that I might hear back from more of you who are public knitters, because a lot of people who, well, I don't know if a lot of people, but some people who knit in public like to knit in public, and they like to share that they knit in public. So they might be the ones who are more likely to share. But I would be particularly interested to know if you are a private knitter. So maybe a lot of other people don't know that you knit, even though, like, knitting is a huge part of my life. I knit all the time. I think about it all the time. You know, I really like yarn. I really like buying yarn. So, anyway, just something I've been thinking about lately, and yeah, I just thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about over on the Ravelry group if anyone else would like to share. So, I think that is about it for this week. One other thing I forgot to show you that I got at the yarn store this week, which I'm going to try out and let you know, is I got a pair of the Knit Pro Carbons and these are 2.25 millimeter, which is a US 1, 80 centimeters cable length, which is 32 inch or so cable length. And I usually knit socks on a 2 millimeter needle, which is a US 0, which is what I'm knitting the Salus socks on. But I would really like to be able to knit on larger sock needles again. I used to knit socks on a US 2.5, which I think is a, why do I say these things? I think it's a 3 millimeter. Don't hold me to that. But as I've been knitting more, my gauge has loosened up significantly, and so I have been knitting socks on a 0, and I don't find it as enjoyable. So I would like to be able to knit on a larger gauge needle. So I got these carbons to try out because I know that they are a little bit stickier, not stickier, but you know, like they're not slick and smooth as metal needles, which is what I usually knit on. So, but they're not wood needles also, which I have not loved. Ever. I would love to love a wooden needle, but I just don't. Or I haven't tried one yet that I love. So I got these ones to hopefully be able to achieve a tighter gauge with a larger needle so that I can knit socks on 2.25 millimeters again. I will let you know how that goes. I don't know if it's going to be this week, but we'll see. Anyway, I think that is it for this week, and I would love it if you would come over on to the Ravelry board and share what you're working on. Let me know if you are a public or a private knitter. We also have a knit-along that's going on. I hope I mentioned it in the beginning. It's been so lovely to see all the projects that you guys are working on. I mean, all the projects, either Swedish Spring or the lattice shawl. But it's been lovely to see your different yarn choices and the possibilities of all the different color combinations and things like that. Of course, it's been so great to see some of your finished objects already. So I'm hoping that my yarn for the next Swedish Spring I'm knitting will come this week so that I can join you guys. And if you are interested in sharing on Instagram, you can use the hashtag SpringLatticeKAL, which stands for knit along. And so then other people can find your projects in that hashtag. You can also use that hashtag on Ravelry. I don't tag things very often, but you are welcome to use it there. And then be sure to enter your finished shawls in the finished objects thread. And we are going to have some lovely prizes for that, which maybe I'll share with you next week. So remember, you still have plenty of time. This will run until June 5th, which is my birthday, so I'm planning on probably closing the thread at the end of the day. The end of the day here, which will be kind of middle to the end of the day in the US. Oh, maybe I'll just do it on the morning of June 6th. We'll see. We'll see how it goes, but yes, I am looking forward to seeing your progress, and that's it. So until next week, I hope you have a lot of time to knit and do other crafts if you like, and that you have fun with whatever you're doing. So I'll see you then. Bye!